He writes for the Washington Post, and he was part of the group that uncovered the rampant sexual harassment going on within the Washington Redskins organization. He's Will Hobson. You can follow him on Twitter at the Will Hobson. Will, top of the morning to you. Thanks so much for your time. And first, before we get to your work and the story, how are you and the family and everybody in your life doing during all this time?
We're all doing fine, guys. Thanks for asking.
Well, good. Well, we want to ask that of all our guests, and we have for 4 months. How long did you and your colleagues work on this story?
We actually had started poking into this about 2 years ago, and then gave it up because we couldn't get anyone to go on the record, and we couldn't get anything in the way of documentation to substantiate some of the claims that we were hearing.
And I guess the one part of this that is fascinated us is, we're talk show hosts. I don't consider myself a journalist for sure, and certainly barely a member of the media. But the fact that this story was kind of out there for a few days, and that most everybody kept their mouth shut and had a few guesses. But I guess almost congratulations are in order to all you at the Post to keep something under wraps so long. That doesn't happen too much in this day and age. How important was it for everybody to keep this tight until Friday, and how did you accomplish that?
It was. I've never had a situation like this where we've been working on a story where there's been so much speculation, publicly. Candidly, I think a lot of it had to do with just the nature of the subject matter, because I think perhaps because it was legally actionable, we're just not something that the other media outlets were going to hop right on. But yeah, it was a difficult and challenging situation.
Of the people in the organization that you talk to, is there a belief that they feel that Bruce Allen and Daniel Snyder had to know something was up, that things just weren't right and they overlooked it? Or did they think it's possible that it never made its way to the corner offices?
I mean, it depends on who you ask. I think, the lead woman that we quoted believes there's no way that Bruce didn't know what she was dealing with because he's basically sat across the office from her. As for Dan, Dan's the owner. He's not in there on a 9-to-5 basis. But what the folks we talked to said was, it's plausible Dan didn't know this was going on, but they felt he was responsible to a degree because of the way he treated his executives. I think as one woman said, her boss is a guy named Dennis Green, who was both verbally abusive but also would sexually harass her. She said, it was my understanding that the way Dennis spoke to me was the way that Dan spoke to Dennis, basically.
The one thing throughout this that I find maybe the most fascinating of how that stayed under wraps, I almost can understand why team employees didn't say anything. And because as someone who worked in a minor league hockey organization, I was told by GMs, there's 1,000 people that want your job. So that line's not that different, whether it's a man or woman in the sports world, because you get underpaid, you work your ass off, you don't get appreciated, and you're told constantly that there's a line of people willing to replace you. But what baffles me is how brazen it seemed the Redskins personnel were with female reporters who didn't work for it. It's one thing to try to do it and threaten their job. It's another to be that brazen with reporters covering the team. And that seems to me that that's the most mind-boggling that wasn't brought up more by outside sources. Does that jive with what your reporting was?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think 2 points on that. First off, I had, to your first point, I had one woman say, it was a terrible place to work for everybody. The men were verbally abused too. As women, we were just harassed in a different way. And then to the second point, that to me is the one thing that really stuck out from all this stuff was just how brazen some of this behavior was. That this was, some of this was going on behind closed doors and, in text messages and private conversations that weren't necessarily witnessed by other folks. But some of this was going on just in broad view of, of team employees at at bars, at NFL events, the NFL Combine, and I mean these guys were not acting like they were ashamed at all of what they were doing, nor did they fear any type of punitive measures if word trickled back to their bosses.
He's Will Hobson, one of the reporters that uncovered the Redskins sexual harassment story that was printed yesterday at WashingtonPost.com and in the paper today. You can follow Will on Twitter at @TheWillHobson. Surprised at all that Daniel Snyder did not speak yesterday? I know he wouldn't comment for your guy's story, and you asked him multiple times to say something. I know he did something yesterday in hiring a firm, but he's constantly letting Ron Rivera be the face and the voice of the organization. And in the wake of scandal or bad news, usually you need somebody besides the head coach to be the face of an organization. Was it surprising to you and your community that Snyder didn't address this?
Not particularly, because Dan does not do a lot of public availabilities. He's not that type of owner. And yeah, I mean, it is what it is. We asked to talk to him a number of times, and I do think part of this was, they're fighting wars on a couple different fronts right now. We started reaching out on this a few weeks ago. The name issue was starting to bubble up, and they got 3 minority owners who are trying to sell the team and sell their stakes and are applying pressure on Dan. So I think part of this was just not comprehending the gravity of what we were working on. And then once they did, I think it was, Ron, they're trying to make Ron the face of the organization, and they're talking about this coach-centric culture, and yeah, so that's why they gave Ron to us instead of Dan. And Ron, to his credit, said there was a culture that existed, and we're trying to make sure that it has stopped, and that going forward that there's a different culture here.
When you look going forward, there was a lot of speculation that this was going to be Donald Sterling-esque and it would force Snyder to sell the team. I don't know if the story reaches that levels. I mean, it's disgusting, don't get me wrong, but the fact that it's not Snyder doing it, I don't know if that, that type of culture is bad enough. We just had the Mavericks and the NBA with a similar culture. This is not, unfortunately, it's not new to sports. Snyder doesn't want to get rid of this team, but the fact that the minority owners are all selling, how much jeopardy is the franchise by being owned by Daniel Snyder in your opinion?
I mean, it's a tough question. I don't think, jeopardy. I mean, look, NFL teams are obviously every industry is being deeply affected right now by the pandemic, but NFL teams are, money machines. You own an NFL team, it basically prints money, and you can't. It's incredibly difficult to run an organization in the NFL into financial dire straits, just given the nature of the TV contracts and the revenue that flows through that league. So, I mean, the on-the-field product has been difficult for the large duration of Snyder's ownership. So, I think the most accurate thing to say right now is that the organization is at a crossroads. There are some folks applying pressure to try to affect a change in ownership, but Dan is not indicating any interest in selling the team. And, in the NFL, there is not a long track record of owners being forced to give up ownership for behavior like what we've described.
If I asked Will Hobson, taxpayer, member of the community, and not Will Hobson, reporter, Washington Post, going forward, he wants a new stadium. And there were a lot of people that thought that, changing the name of the team, that's probably going to curry enough favor where down the road, somebody will give him what he wants. Is this the type of story, though, in which those same politicians who maybe could have been turned by changing the name now are going to be like, yeah, Dan, I just don't know if we want to give you the money, if you know what I mean. We'd give it to somebody else, Dan, but I just don't know if we want to give it to you. Do you think that could be some of the legs that comes out of this story, that sentiment just exists in your community, in which you guys are like, yeah, I might bankroll somebody else getting a new stadium, but Dan, I don't know if we bankroll you?
I mean, it's really kind of hard to say. I can imagine it playing a role in a lawmaker's decision-making process, but those types of sweetheart deals are not, for professional sports teams, are not as politically palatable as they used to be in general for anyone.
Right.
And, in this economic climate, they're going to be even less so. So I can imagine it playing a contributing effect, but there's going to be a lot of factors that will go into that decision.
Will, thanks for making time for us, particularly at this hour. Congratulations on you and your colleagues and your hard work in this story, and hopefully we can talk again.
Thanks, guys. It was good talking to you.
Will Hobson's a sports reporter for the Washington Post. He and his colleagues unveiled the Redskins sexual harassment story yesterday at WashingtonPost.com. You can follow Will on Twitter at @TheWillHobson, @TheWillHobson. Hobson, Hobson, as in the former third baseman for the Red Sox, Butch Hobson. Dating myself there.
Yes, you are. But that's okay. I mean, you should have done it 15, 18 minutes ago. You're out of the baseball hour.
Okay. All right.
If you would have done that intro, I should have let you close the hour out. Will Hobson, no relation to Butch Hobson, when we come back type thing.
Boom! Boom! Right there. Maybe if we had communicated before the show, we could have worked something like that out.
Not a sentence. Not a sentence. 20 minutes of dead silence. Actually, more like 12 to 15, because even though David gets the email early, my guess is it goes something like this. David probably sits down at about 20:06 in front of the computer, and he looks and he goes, Jesus, he's already sent the email again? I'm going to talk to him for 3 hours. Does he really think that I'm going to hit this button now and not at 6:52?
I've got a morning routine in which I sit down in front of the computer somewhere between 5:40 and 5:45. It depends. My wife's in control of the television in the morning, and she puts some shows on that are just dreadful. Every now and then, though, she's got a show or two that I'm interested in. Sometimes I watch TV a little bit longer, if you must know. 479-5551, 479-5551 is how you can chime into the Williamson Brothers Marine and Roofing text and talk line. I actually believe, Mark, that will be the legs, if you will, to this Washington Post story. I think it cements that Snyder doesn't get a new stadium. And it wouldn't shock me, by the way, if you're the NFL, and I don't know that they care about this story, but if they care about the Shield, they care about the league, they care about the value of their franchises. And if the NFL deep down would prefer a different owner of the Washington Redskins and whatever their name's going to be, okay, the NFL could quietly pick up the phone and let it be known to certain communities, don't give them the money. Just don't do it. Just don't do it.
The NFL didn't say a word last night when the story came out. They already have this morning. They said very little, but they answered it and said these matters are serious, disturbing, and contrary to the NFL's values. Everyone in the NFL has a right to work in an environment free from any and all forms of harassment. Washington has engaged outside counsel to conduct a thorough investigation into these allegations. The club has pledged it will give its full cooperation to the investigator, and we expect the club and all employees to do so. We will meet with the attorneys upon the conclusion of their investigation and take any action based on their findings. Now, let me just explain to you one thing that I would worry about of cooperation, particularly from the employees who don't work for the team anymore. Because most of the people that have been accused of this have either quit or have been fired in the course of the last 10 days. And one of the things that is very apparent early on in the article in today's Washington Post is there were 15 former female Redskins employees who told the Post that they were sexually harassed during their time at the club. The other 14 women spoke on the condition of anonymity, citing fear of litigation because some signed non-disclosure agreements with the team that threaten legal retribution if they speak negatively about the club. How the hell can a lawyer do an investigation? Because the Post asked the Redskins to release the female employees from these agreements so they could speak on the record without fear of legal reprisal, and the club said no. So I can't imagine that the club's going to retract their non-disclosures from these other employees for this investigation.
Well, they said no to the Washington Post, all right? They may not say no to this independent investigator.
They may not.
Because you would think that this investigator would come to the Redskins and go, well, if you want us to get to the bottom of this, these people have to be able to talk to us. Okay? So we would know right then and there whether or not the Redskins are even remotely, serious about this. So 479-5551, 479-5551 on the Williamson Brothers Marine and Roofing text and talk line.
But I mean, and you may be right with all the women, but Dennis Green, former president of business operations, he's the one who apparently sold access to Redskins cheerleaders at a calendar shoot in Costa Rica. Well, he hasn't worked for the team since 2018. He ain't talking.
Well, probably not.
You think Santos, the director of pro personnel, who was accused by 6 employees and 2 reporters and he was fired last week, do you think he's talking?
Well,
I mean,
if they can talk, if they're if the Redskins release them from their order that they can't talk, they may talk. They may want to defend themselves. So, people like to talk. They do, especially if they want to get something off their chest. If they feel they are being unfairly portrayed, people like to talk. Especially since in this case, you're not talking to the Post. You're talking to an investigator. In theory, this is going to remain a lot more private.
I got you.
Well, but you're right. I mean, that is the one thing that when this is done, we'll know right away whether or not this is serious or not, or whether or not this was complete window dressing. Because if the Redskins won't release the former employees to this private investigator who's supposed to get to the bottom of it, well, then this is all window dressing. I do think, though, I don't think Daniel Snyder is going to get a community unless put it this way, Mark, the only chance I think Daniel Snyder has of getting the financing that he wants to get a new stadium, the Redskins have to win, period. They're not going to get it because they're the Washington NFL team. And if they're mediocre or bad for another however many years, he needs to win. Communities get drunk when they win.
And right now, at this particular moment in time, it's not close. They have 4 teams in the D.C. area, and they're the worst. And that includes the Wizards. That's hard to do.
And even though the Giants have the worst record in the NFL over the last 3 years, I think most people feel, looking at the 4 organizations in the East, that the Redskins are the worst. That they're the bottom of the division, even though actually the Giants are, and they've earned it.